Okay, so the Final Fantasy XIV Combat Changes live letter just came out a little bit ago, and I made a summary of the live letter. You can watch that. But this is just going to be me talking about some of the changes they addressed and some of my thoughts on how combat jobs and all jobs have worked in Final Fantasy XIV, and just kind of go over some of my initial impressions of what we got. And I disagree with some of them, but I think overall they're very good. So with that out of the way, the job trailer is going to be playing behind me, as in like on the screen, not physically behind me. But the job changes overall seems like they are once again trying to simplify the game. And I disagree with that. However, my caveat to that is going to be I think it's a very good thing for the game. They addressed a lot of the issues that I had with the game with all jobs, and they made some simplifications, such as the very first thing they kind of addressed is this mod combination or like comboing off of other skills that a lot of skills have. For example, continuation and burst strike for Gunbreaker. I know Dragoon had some, Dancer has some. A lot of classes have these jobs where you hit a button and then it just activates another skill, which is another button that you have to press. And I think that just adds to button bloat. And that was one of my biggest problems there. And I want to say button bloat as in you have all of these actions that could have been condensed down and they feel like they were added for the sake of adding more to a rotation or more substance to a class when it really just didn't need to be there. And as a controller player most of the time, and I bet keyboard players can relate to this somewhat, is in you have a very limited amount of real estate. I get that with hotbar swapping on controller, you really have access to 32 really good actions, and on mouse and keyboard, especially if you have an MMO mouse, you get 36 to 40 depending on how your keybinds are. But in reality, you have a prime real estate on a controller of 16 button presses, and on mouse and keyboard about the same of 16 to 20 without having to think too much about anything or any modifiers. So anything above that just seems to be button bloat. And with this new skill or this new setting that they added, it allows you to now simplify some of these things. So I will always refer to the Gunbreaker continuation into burst strike combination as you can now just use this as one button push if you want to. I also want to say this is completely optional. You don't have to use it. If you have muscle memory of your job and you're used to these skills, then keep it that way. You don't have to worry about changing anything. But for those of you who might not have built that muscle memory or want to limit the amount of keybinds that you're using, this is a great option. It just makes it simpler and it removes this whole idea of button bloat that I had, because you might have it, but you can function with it perfectly, and I might have an issue with it and I'm switching hotbars all the time because I'm trying to deal with this. It just removes all of that. I think that's a great change. So like I know everyone's just going to be like, oh, you just spam these two buttons during continuation anyway, so why not just make it one? It's just easier across the board and I love it. So I'm very glad that they did that. My problem with going off of that a little bit with all the classes is it seemed like every single now 100 level action or every single action is a continuation of a previous skill. So it's like Stardiver gets a Stardiver 2.0 attached to the end of it. A lot like how the Red Mage combo works right now, where it just keeps building off of each other after you do the melee combo, which I don't actually have a problem with. And I think it builds into this mod type setting that they set up. I'm sorry if I keep saying mod, but the setting that they set up, which allows you to have simplified button pushes. And ultimately, with how many actions and skills that there are in the game, this was about the only direction that they could go. Because you at some point have to stop adding actions and just start adding continuations to actions, which overall I think is a very good thing. The thing that I disagree with, and this is a personal thing, I think what they did is the best decision that they made for the game. I personally would like to have a little bit more complexity to jobs and have them feel a little bit more different than they currently did in 90, and just have them be not reworked, but have it be a new learning experience. And how they currently have it set up is if you learned a rotation in Endwalker, you probably know it for Dawntrail, with the addition of 1 or 2 added skills that are just added onto your rotation. And I want to say this again. I think that is a very good thing for the health and longevity of the game and for the majority of players of the game. The people who have a problem with that are probably the higher end tier raiders, ultimate raiders, parsers, whatever you want to say it. The people who care about being good at the game are probably the few people that have problems with that, because the people who play Final Fantasy just for the story or just to look good and get some glams and just experience everything this game has to offer and take it a little bit more casually, they probably don't care at all. They're probably like, oh great, I already know my rotation. I don't have to worry about relearning it again in Dawntrail. I get a build off of that. And as this is my second expansion, I don't actually know the difference of what it was to build from like Stormblood to Shadowbringers, or from Shadowbringers really to Endwalker, because I started playing and Endwalker came like 3 months later. So I didn't really have that transition period. My first time really learning a job was in Endwalker. So other people might be able to talk more about that experience of having to relearn a job in expansion, but that's kind of alleviated in this process when we are transitioning now into Dawntrail, which once again, I would like to say, I think is a very good thing for the game. Other things that they did with skills, which I actually really agree with, is how they implemented like Embolden, for example, and these skills that now proc something else, in a sense of they allow you to build gauge, which allows you to then use a different part of the class. So Reaper has one of these as well with the Enshroud. But going off of Red Mage, you had Embolden, which then just gave you all the mana that you needed to go into your melee combo. Instead of it adding the mana, the black and white mana, it just allows you to go into your melee combo. And I think this is a good thing too, because it now allows you to not have to worry about, oh, am I overcapping on the amount of mana that I have, or am I overcapping on my shroud gauge on Reaper? It just allows you to go into it, and it's easier to have resource management that way, because say a burst window is coming up and you know everything's going to be under buffs under Reaper, and you're at 70 gauge and you use your Enshroud, you now are at 120 gauge, but 20 of it is wasted. With this new ability, or how this new setting works, you just go into it, you keep your 70, you go into your second shroud phase, and you have 20 left over instead of losing 20. And I don't recall what they said for Machinist. That would be the only other one that I don't remember that it really affects. I know Red Mage benefits from this, and you know, Reaper benefits from this immensely, so I think it's good things. There are other things like Monk, this change of having chakras where you can now have 10 chakras instead of 5. It allows you to overcap without worrying about losing out on them. And these changes are all wonderful. I think they are great. These are things that the game should have had almost all along, and it just makes resource management better. I think this benefits either high-end tiers and low-end tier players. This is a change that affects all people, which is good for all people. No one should be complaining about this change, even though it is a simplification. It's a very good simplification of things. Going on to some of the other things that I saw, like the reworks, the Dragoon rework I think is very good. They now aligned it a lot with all the other DPSs. You can now kind of start out with a burst window, which was one of the things that Dragoon was lacking, because you usually had to wait till 1 minute or 2 minutes in order to really get a good burst damage off, and now alleviates that issue. But with that being said, the majority of the problem that people had with Endwalker is how it felt very 2 minute burst meta window, and it doesn't seem like Dawntrail has done anything to alleviate that. The live letter wasn't exactly clear. Some things might have changed, but based off of, the feeling of the presentation and how things were presented, I highly doubt that our quote unquote 2-minute window has changed. And that's one of those simplifications that is probably really good for the health of the game overall. It makes everything easier overall to balance. It makes the gameplay easier for people who are more casual setting. And there's nothing wrong with being more casual setting, because ultimately, as I said earlier, the people complaining about 2-minute metas are usually your high-end tier players. And I don't know if Final Fantasy is a game where you really want to cater to those type of people. Nothing against them. I'm one of those people. But that being said, this is one of those things that I do expect it to continue going forward. Continuing on, still on the topic of Dragoon, however, is it also got some simplifications, as in reducing the number of actions that you needed in the 2-minute window and removal of some actions and some of the bloat that Dragoon had. As if I remember correctly, in your opening sequence, you have somewhere between 36 and 42 button pushes, as I'm going to call them, but unique actions that you have to do in 17 seconds, which kind of gets overwhelming. And then you had to repeat this process every 2-minute window. And it just got to be a lot. And I do think simplifying and taking some of that away is a very good thing. And then I don't know if this means they're removing positionals altogether in Dawntrail. It kind of makes me feel like they are. I don't have any opinion on positionals. I think if you remove positionals, you can make fights more entertaining or different. You can have a lot of variety to fights. But I know a lot of people think that positionals are a good thing, and it's one of the things that makes melees unique and one of the only things they have to worry about. So I can understand why people might be upset if they remove positionals. I personally don't care. But that relates to Dragoon, because the Fang and Claw and the Wheeling Thrust is now, if I'm understanding this correctly, it's now just one skill instead of 2 different skills, and it's just called Drake's Bane. And your combo is still going to alternate and loop. It's just going to now be this 4th button, if I understand it correctly. I'm unsure exactly, because they didn't obviously show some of the hotbars and some of the skills, but it might just be a 4-part combo instead of a 5-part combo that's alternating. I'm unsure of that, but they did say to simplify it, they did remove the positional of this and replaced it with just Drake's Bane. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Yeah, but that's enough about Dragoon. I'm going to talk about Astro for a little bit. I like the change of it. I do think that one of the problems with Astro that I had was you have this card mechanic and you have this... now I'm going to talk about Astro for a little bit, and... one of my biggest problems with Astro is that you had all these cards and they were random, and for someone who already has to worry about healing on the class and having to spot heal, you now added an extra mechanic to it, which now made it so that I have to pay attention to what card I get and then have to figure out on my party list who I am going to give this card to. And they just alleviated that altogether by having... you just get 4 set cards. You get an offensive buff, a defensive buff, and a curative buff, and then you get to use them as you will. So this just simplifies it in the sense of every minute I get 4 cards. I know what they do. I just have to decide who I'm give them to and when I'm going to give them to. If you know a tank buster is coming up, you can give someone a defensive card. Or if you have to heal them afterwards, you can give them a curative card. Or we know we're going to be under a 1-minute buff window. Let me throw my DPS a buff card. So that thing I think is really good for Astro. It simplifies it enough, but allows it to stay unique and removes one of the, quirks of the class, but I think ultimately makes it better. I really enjoy playing Astro, and I think this still retains the identity of it, but it alleviates some of the issues of having to figure out everything in the moment, and I think that's going to be a very good thing for the class. Other things that they did that I really like is they applied things to all classes to just make the game a little bit smoother and better, and just allows for a little bit more leniency. So all of the mitts like Addle and Feint are now 15 seconds at level 90 and above, just gives you a little bit more leeway, or it makes it so that more things are going to go out during the fight that need to be under buffs consecutively, which might make healing more difficult. So it's going to be interesting what we see there. Swift cast is now on a 40-second timer instead of a 60-second timer, which, you know, everyone loves the ability to have swift cast. I don't think it's a big enough of a change that warrants people to be concerned at all, because it allows you to have, like, what is this going to be, 3 extra swift cast in a 10-minute fight, maybe 4. So it doesn't really change too much. It allows you to save more runs or get more prog in faster if you're progging fights, or just makes it so that there's not such a weight on healers and alliance raids if a lot of people are dying. So I think that's a very good change. And then the same thing with Rampart and some of the 60-minute skills for tanks. They just got their timers extended. I think these are all just good things to have. More leeway, less of this, oh, I need to hit this Rampart at exactly this time, otherwise the team is not going to admit and we're going to die things. So I think that is a very good change. I think the last thing that they talked about but they didn't really address, which I don't really have an issue with, but like Summoner having a res and res mage instead of red mage, as some people call it. They didn't really address this so much, but I do think that they will address it in the future. I personally don't really care about the whole res on a caster situation. I think if they're going to do it, ideally I would like it like blue mage, how it reses. A summoner can res every like 3 minutes or so. Just put a higher cooldown on it. Let healers keep it the same, because they're healers, they should be able to have that ability. But casters maybe put a 6-minute cooldown on it, like an invuln, or a 3-minute cooldown on it, just so you can't just constantly be resing. But once again, that adds issues to things that are like casual content, as dungeons and alliance raid and whatever else that is going on. I don't have too much of an opinion either way. Personally, as I said, would like it to be more of a cooldown one-time use rather than a multiple use. Just have your summoner be a second healer essentially, or your red mage just constantly getting everyone up. But that is a conversation that they said they will address in the future. But overall, if I had to sum up everything that they said in all of these job changes, I just want to say that I think it's a good thing. I think everything they did is good. I might not agree with them, but I think they're very good for the health of the game. They made skills build off of classes already that people are used to, so people don't have to readjust to learning a class. They simplified some of the button pushes. They simplified a lot of the gauges. They made gauges better. Healers all got AoE dots so that your dungeon play is going to be easier. Everything that they did, you could see that they had thought in, and were things that the game were missing that they just added on to now alleviate some of these holes. So I think overall, I'm very happy with the direction that Dawntrail appears to be going in. I want to say the word appears because we haven't played it yet. So when we play it, maybe my opinions will change and I'll think it's good or bad or better, but we'll see. But honestly, those are my initial thoughts. You can share your thoughts down in the comments below and tell me I'm an idiot as always, and don't like and don't subscribe to everything, because you know, that's what we do around here. But anyway, with that all the way, I hope you have a great day.